Thank you, Gavin, and thank you everybody for turning up. This is my first time speaking at ATU, hopefully not my last, so I'm very excited to be here. And it's also, I suppose, my first time talking through the ideas behind the exhibition for the Salvage Agency. And we're right on the cusp of installation right now as well, so everything is going to be kicking off on November the 1st. So I'm also, after this, going to have a quick look around the spaces and see how the team are getting on this week. But for now, I'll kick it off by talking through a little bit. As Gavin says, I'm no stranger to the West. However, when you come to Galway, you're really kind of, or for me anyway, I'm just coming in and I'm seeing things like the Art Centre or 126 or the Arts Festival or even previous TULCAs. So to have been invited to come in and curate from the inside was very interesting for me, and I started to look at the city in very different ways than what I normally would. One of the real key images that we've been using this year for the TULCA identity are the Blaschka models, which are located out in the University of Galway in the Museum of Zoology and Marine Biology there. And they're very overlooked, I think. This is a model here, but if you look on the social media for TULCA, you'll see we have a suite of about 6 to 8 of these images altogether. And they're basically learning tools, I guess, in a way, glass models from the 18th century by the Blaschka brothers, who were German. And they would have been cited in various universities. So they would have started as marine biology anyway. And then as time went on, they became everything from flowers to other species or insects. And the idea was that they would be larger than life. If you light them from the back with glass, you'll see the inner workings of them. So that's how they became this really important educational tool for universities and for students. So out in the university, there's a collection out there that we're highlighting as part of the program as well that you can have a look at. And we specifically asked Owen out there, who's in charge of the collection, to select a few images that would chime in a little bit with the more Atlantic side of these specimens. So we're using these. It was a nice start for me to kind of think through spaces, of which there are quite a few hidden gems in Galway, I have to say. Here is a little bit of information about the brief, which you can read on the website, but like Gavin is saying, it is very much looking a lot at art and ecology in one way, but it's also looking at the hidden ideas, I suppose, or the way that artists work, the way of salvaging, I suppose, or how we think through things in that way. But a very important thing for me to talk about before I hop into the thematic of the Salvage Agency is my previous history as a curator, which is with Askeaton Contemporary Arts in County Limerick. So there's no gallery spaces here. This is a project I began in 2006, and I'm from Askeaton, so that's the link there. There isn't really a history of contemporary art there, but I guess having studied in other places and moving away, I started to look back at this place and go, this is a lot of potential to create work, to help artists to produce new work. And because there isn't a gallery space or that history of contemporary art, it also becomes this free place, this free space that you can do something without maybe people watching you in the way that they would if you were in a studio as such or a gallery space. So this is Askeaton Contemporary Arts right here. And what you're looking at is in the center there is this is the medieval part of the town. This river is the River Deal, and up here is the Shannon Estuary. So this is Limerick, all this green area, and on the other side is Clare. So you can see it's an interesting town, second oldest in Ireland. On site of the castle is 1199, and that's kind of, I suppose, the central part of the town really. But also, as you can see, as well as this really green environment, there's also like quite a lot of industry in the area, which makes it a very interesting spot as well for people to think of, I suppose, some people think of small towns in Ireland as being very bucolic and this kind of utopian rural ideal. But in reality, they all have their own complexities. And so they become really interesting places to work and make work and think about research and how you do all of that. So I have a selection of the projects made on site. This is just to give you a sense. I show this because sometimes I'm not always talking to Irish people, so it's good to have, and even when I am. So this is it here, roughly around here, that's where we are. So not that far away from Galway, really. Stone's throw. 2 hours in the train, I can attest to that. So I have a selection of, I think it's 4 or 5 images that I'm just going to show you of the spaces that we use and how we think about exhibiting and making work in that area. And it also ties in with how I started to think about TULCA and how to engage with the city here. So, because we don't have any white cube spaces, we use a lot of civic spaces. These are spaces donated to us for free. And communities become very much a part of this too. So what you're looking at here is artwork from 2016 by Tina O'Connell and Neil White. And they decided that, I think it was coincided more or less that year with the Venice Biennale, and possibly Documenta had been the year before, I'm not sure. They decided that they were going to create a pavilion for Askeaton. So we would have our own pavilion, citing us there within that framework and that international art scene thoughts. And this is, as you can maybe also see, our community centre. So the Community Council in Askeaton are really responsible for everyday life, making sure that there's proper street lighting, lobbying, various local authorities, just to get things done. And it's a voluntary group. And they give us the use of this space, which is really wonderful, and the perfect place to site a pavilion. So up here, where the curtains are, that's the stage. And then down here is under the stage where they had projected an image as well underneath here. So these community centres, this one anyway in particular, would have been part funded by the Arts Council back in the 1950s, when they thought it was a time to bring art out into the countryside, into rural capabilities, so anyone could have access to art or the arts. The idea would be that on a Friday night you might have your exhibition. On a Saturday night there might be a show band in for your local dance, and maybe on a Sunday the local drama group would put on a play. So this is very interesting and sort of equal way of thinking about art and thinking through it. This is a streetscape photograph. Again, you can see our wonderful medieval castle lurking there in the background. It looks slightly sinister, I have to say, but it's really not. I always find it interesting to show these images too, because you're sort of, where is the art? So the art is over here. It's the eight boxed. This is by an American artist called Chris Kalmar. At the time he was living in Los Angeles. He's still in California. And his practice was very much looking at sound a lot, and also sculptural works. So he'd never been to Ireland before and begun his research. I think the conversation went on for maybe 2 years, interrupted a little bit by COVID. Zoom is an amazing tool to have when you're keeping those research going. When we bring artists through, we wouldn't have funding for site visits from somewhere like Los Angeles. Certainly from places like Europe, London, Berlin, any of those, but definitely not a long haul flight like that. So Zoom becomes a really important tool for talking through things and research. So Chris was very interested in holy wells, which are these wonderful anomalies in the landscape that are very deep in Irish heritage and history. They predate, I guess, any kind of sense of holiness in the sense of the Catholic religion anyway. But they're sort of like these very mysterious places. And he wanted to capture the sound of a holy well and play it back into the middle of that community centre during our open day that year. So it was like a live stream of what you might hear at this well, this kind of very ephemeral work to kind of experience. So this is really just propped there as he was trying it out. The lads in the car look very engaged, as you can see with that. And here is another shot. So this is a wonderful work by Fiona Riley. I think this is 2017, if I'm right. So if you're looking at the site here, this is, again, a medieval site, but it's a natural moat around an island. And the centre, I'll use my arrow again, there's your castle. So there's 4 ages here on the site. This is 1199. Over here will be the banqueting hall, which is mid-1200s, I think. And then over here with the scaffolding, which is gone now because it's more or less to the point where they'd like it to be, was the Constable Tower, which would have been the head of security really on site. That was much later. And then down here, my personal favourite, the Hellfire Club. But I'll get to that a little bit later on because there's a wonderful work here I'll show in a moment. So Fiona arrived, and when we bring artists, it's predominantly working on residency format, or for the most part, we have a summer residency called Welcome to the Neighbourhood that has been going since 2006. The organisation has expanded over the years. As Gavin was saying, we have a publishing press now called ACA Public. There's a media channel, and there's a lot of other, tentacles that we reach out into the community, nationally and internationally, as we've grown. So Fiona arrived, and within the first couple of days, we sort of set up artists that they arrived, they're connecting with each other. That would be maybe 5 to 7 artists on site. And then the team move on site as well during that time. So there's producers, technicians. there could be maybe 10 or 15 people at any time coming to dinner of an evening. So we sort of arrange it that the artists arrive and hit the ground running. So they'll have tours with local historians. There'll be kind of team building, if you like, where we'll pick them out for a day, go and have nice lunches places, maybe see a few ring force, a few holy wells even. So when Fiona arrived, she got really kind of caught up in the idea of the time within the town, this kind of depth of history. And she just kept hearing as she was walking through with the tour guide the ages of buildings, or this is built in that year, this was built in another year, this particular date has this significance, and so on and so forth. So she downloaded an app on her phone that could age a place in seconds, and decided that she would put these here. So she had one here in the castle. There's a 12th century Franciscan friary where she had another, and she had the community centre, which I mentioned earlier was from the 1950s. So what you're looking at is the exact age of that castle up until the open day that day, which I think was June 25th, maybe. Here I go with the numbers and the ages. June 25th to 2017, I think it was that she was on a residency. So that means that the castle, and this is in seconds, is something like 25,734,162,879 seconds. And this was left up for, I think, 2 weeks altogether. It was just quite a large print on a banner. And a local man threw a drone up and got the footage and photographed it and sent it on to us sort of free of charge and said, here you go, because this became such a talking point within the community. People like to speculate when they see artworks in Askeaton in the town. They love to speculate as to what it is. So there was a few theories going about this. One was it was the time before the apocalypse would happen. Someone else said, these are the winning lottery numbers. So, you know, it was this constant kind of going on the speculation, because it also was positioned in such a place where there's a medieval bridge running right there. So it's really kind of quite pivotal focal point of the town. We also engage in places like riverways. These are quite important. This is a Scottish artist who came over in 2018 and was having a couple of pints one night, you know, just to be social. Came across a bunch of card players playing cards in the corner of one of the local bars. So he reconstructed that and situated it on the river, which would have been an important part for passing trade for centuries and centuries. It would have been the main artery of the town, and sat them there. They forgot they were playing. But I mean, it existed then afterwards as an installation where he had the raft, he had the table, and he had the chairs. The lady in white won. It was a cash prize. It was a great day. But they got very excited. The guy that had here, he couldn't swim. He was afraid of his life, but he totally forgot where he was once he started to play. And I think the game was 45, if I'm not mistaken. And then the final slide I'm going to show from Askeaton is by Stephen Brands, Cork-based artist, originally from Birmingham. And this is called the Hellfire Club Askeaton, A History Continued. So that building I showed earlier, the one on site with the, I'll just go back very briefly, with the kind of reddish windows here, this tinge, that's the Hellfire Club. There's only 2 of them in Ireland. One is in Askeaton, and one is up the Wicklow Mountains. So in 2010, the organisation, we started to think through the longevity of what was happening. We've been running 4 years. We're like, what's important and what's meaningful, and how do we sort of evolve as well as an organisation, and how we support artists to make work. So we've begun working on the Hellfire Club as a point of departure, because also it was the place where, when I was growing up and being a child in the town, it was all about the medieval ruins. It's the castle, it's the abbey, it's, you know, the Hellfire Club was only 200 or 300 years old, you know, it wasn't worth the effort. But also I suppose there was a bit of a stigma surrounding it, because the Hellfire Club would have been a secret society for the gentry predominantly. There would have been devil worshipping, allegedly, heavy drinking, card playing, all the fun stuff that happens in these secret societies. But it was in the perfect spot as well. As you could see, the island was there, very private. But incidentally, the one in Askeaton was the only club that had an acknowledged female member by Celinda Blenner Hassett. So we invited, I think it was 5 artists commissioned to come and make work there. And Stephen was one of those. Incidentally, so is Louise Manifold, front row here. Go on the website, have a look, you'll see Louise's work. So Stephen made this sign where he imagined a future for this club, because the research was very bare. Most of the research you get were from the UK clubs, which is where these clubs started. Whether the research was bare because obviously it was a secret society, so there wasn't going to be a whole lot going on anyway, or whether it was because we were coming from a deeply Catholic country then, Also, there was like a big fire in the records offices in Dublin. It was all of these perfect storm that created this moment where artists could imagine a past and predict another imagined future. So Stephen starts off imagining it as a modernist building. It was sited on the river right in front of, so you could see the sign and the club at the same time. But what would happen was that tourists would come through and they would start to read through this and think it was real, even though the dates are obviously totally off. So I think the locals kind of, it became an in-joke where people really like to watch, you know, tourists coming along, and they'd photograph it and go, this is really interesting. And then when they kind of got to the end and realised, actually this is not a real heritage sign, they'd photograph it again, which I never quite understood. It's the same photograph. Last year, this is actually, it stayed on site for, I mean, it was up since 2012, so no, 2010, sorry. 2012, sorry. It stayed on site for until just this year. So it was a lot longer than what it was supposed to, but these are what happens with these kind of legacy works that live within the fabric. They become so integrated into the community. They're almost forgotten about. They're just another layer, which is something I'm really interested in as a curator. But last year, this came under attack from the Tidy Towns competition committee. Yeah. Now, Stephen is a very interesting artist and he loves to be provocative. So these are the kind of conversations he just gets an awful thrill out of. Tidy Towns Committee, otherwise known as Tidy Towns Mafia, came through and had a look and made their comments. And normally it's quite a bulky document, scathing, I would say, and that's putting it kindly. And they came through anyway and they were looking at this and it looks like a heritage site. He picks these colours from the 70s, the 1970s OPW. They don't have the same colours now, but these are the colours from then. And he was finding there was a small plaque, I think, inside in the ruins with these colours, and he was using it. So people do get kind of lured in. So anyway, Tidy Towns were saying, you know, the heritage sign is interesting, but you have the wrong years in it, and you need to address that for next year's Tidy Towns competition. Now, I'm not sure who was behind that, because that's also a secret society, if you like, a secret society of judges coming around to decide. It wasn't about what was in between those years. I mean, you know, it was perfectly believable for them that a fireball lays waste to the interior, or that, you know, a giant slug has been spotted roaming around the top of it, or in fact, you know, a monster cat with the face of a previous Prime Minister, Bertie Ahern, also is inhabiting the space. No, it was the years. It was the years that just really galled them. 2240 was just, it was a step too far for Tidy Towns. So there you go. So naturally enough, when it came to thinking through TULCA and the Salvage Agency, I thought of Stephen and his work, because I thought it would be interesting how he might respond to a space or a place within Galway. And one of the places I thought about was the centre of the quadrangle building in the University of Galway, which is an interesting spot. Also knowing that Stephen had experience with other quadrangles. This is in the University of Edinburgh, where Stephen made a kind of a billboard type shape, responding to the university and the history of it. So Stephen, of course, rose to the challenge. As we speak, the construction for the university is being put in place right now. I think they're in search of sandbags, so if anybody knows of a stash of sandbags, please do come up to me after the end of the talk. Stephen, on his site visit, came across this really interesting architectural sculpture that used to be placed on the front of the university building back in the day. And you can see it's a coat of arms, it's a lion and a unicorn, and it's got this ornamental kind of structure in the front as well. So it was originally in Galway City Courthouse, and then it got removed out to the university, and now it's sort of in this back area that's a bit forgotten. But that's Stephen for you, he's quite interested in that. So he responded to that with this lion and unicorn, and they're, you know, looking at this sort of moment of like an actual coat of arms, I suppose, really. And then he went to the Zoology Museum and started taking photographs of the stuffed animals there that are stuffed in a very unique way, let's say. If ever you get the chance, go and have a look. So they're kind of coming in solidarity with the animals that have been forgotten at the back of the university in this sculptural way. And they're coming in solidarity because they're also a little bit forgotten in the University Museum out there. So that's going to be more or less the print that goes on that. But again, how it sits within this area is going to be really interesting to see, and how it kind of responds to the site and the different layers of history there. And also, of course, Stephen is quite humorous in how he thinks through. Another of the artists, and I lied actually, some of the work I'm going to show is still going to be Askeaton back and forth, but you know, it's in a very subtle way. This is Ruth Clinton and Niamh Moriarty, who were on residency in Askeaton in 2018. And I'm showing this previous work to give you a sense of how they work, how they construct, I suppose, narrative, and how they think through things. So they came, and again, they were having a sociable drink one evening and came across this photograph in the local bar, Cagney's Bar. So, and they had to look twice. This is Kiefer Sutherland, just in case anyone is wondering. It really is him. He rocked up sometime in the 80s. I think he was really on a high. He was after doing The Lost Boys, a couple of other really, you know, he was part of the Brat Pack, and turned up. And I think it was shortly after he was jilted at the altar by Julia Roberts, no less. So she had left, she had fled and come to Ireland. I think she was shooting a film there. And he followed, not in a sinister way at all, but he followed to try and find her and make it up with her. So the first airport, of course, that you would land on would be Shannon Airport. And somehow, between one thing and another, he ended up in Askeaton. But he was having a bit of a party, I think, that night, to put it mildly. Just walked into the bar, and it ricocheted all over the town. You'll never guess who just walked in. Most people didn't believe it, but these two did, and they came along. There's Jennifer and Nolene. And I think Nolene was after coming from the Fela that year or something like that. That's the T-shirt. And this photograph happened, and it sits in the bar now. And there's you know, a lot of these kind of weird things. So Ruth and Niamh thought this was really far out there. A lot of their work looks at that kind of connection between, you know, Ireland and America, or in fact how our popular culture, our contemporary culture, is quite influenced by American popular culture as well. And the reason for that historically, and kind of that embeddedness. So they decided to construct a story, you know, a kind of a loose narrative around this visit. And it became a performance. So Ruth is channeling the same look as Jennifer. And Niamh is channeling the same look as Nolene. So this is a snug in a bar next door to where Kiefer had turned up. Kiefer, by the way, was drinking Bacardi and Coke that night. He got a taxi, or maybe a driver took him into the city. He went to a nightclub where he proceeded to get kicked out because he tried to serve his own drink behind the bar. And they took umbrage to that, whether or not he was a Hollywood movie star. That was sacred territory. So he, off he went anyway, continued. He didn't win back Julia Roberts, needless to say, but he did have a good time in Ireland while he was here. Anyway, so the girls reconstructed this. This is a very small snug. You fit hardly anybody in there, but what they did was that people would come in twos and they would perform this story. And you would sit in between the two of them. So the four of you would be budged in together, like a quite small bar, and they'd be telling you this story about how somebody came through town and it was a Hollywood movie star and he had a broken heart. And by telling this story, they started to weave the stories they'd heard throughout the 2 weeks that they'd overheard in bars or in the street or in the supermarket or at dinner, or other stories the artists were talking through. And it became this incredible fiction. And it's also available to watch because they had this like side projection going with it in a separate place. It's also available to watch online in our Askeaton channel if you do want to have a listen to it and see what happens. So for TULCA, Niamh and Ruth are going to be situated in the Galway City Museum in their project space there on the left-hand side when you come in the door. And they have a series of video works. So they're really pushing through again. It's called A Collection of Disarticulated Bones. So it's an ongoing research platform and artistic endeavour where they're showing some video works. They've just come back from residency in Virginia Tech, which was a connection between TULCA and Virginia Tech, swapping around between media departments. And they had a residency there where they performed at a festival, a media festival there. And they also performed in Washington, D.C. with Solace Nua. So these are kind of new connections, I think, really for TULCA, but hopefully this exchange residency will go on to next year and the year after and future years. So this is a replica of the Giant's Causeway, which is in a supermarket in Coleraine. And they're kind of putting together these stories and thinking about, again, these overlayers and these kind of interests of this kind of like American ways of looking at the landscape in one way. One of the other videos that they're showing is where they tracked down a former policeman, former Garda policeman, who spotted a UFO while he was on duty back in the 80s. They found it in a newspaper article, and he was actually sort of based in Askeaton at the time. It's a very interesting part of the world, everyone. You need to come there. You never know what you might find. Once you've seen TULCA, come to Limerick. So they were trying to find out who he was and his name, and he's since retired from the Guards, and he now runs a luxury car business. So if you're getting married or you want to get picked up on something nice from the airport, he's the guy to go to. So he spoke to them about it. We tracked him down. He spoke to them about it. He was on duty himself, and his colleague they were on the night shift, and they spotted something in the sky, which sounds awfully like some kind of military, machine. But back in the 80s, who was going to know? So they filmed themselves being in the car with him and him driving through where he spotted it. And they also go to Shannon Airport, because the first thing he did when he got back to the barracks was to phone and say, "Do you have an aircraft out tonight?" And they denied it. So he had to make a report, because it was he was on duty. It was an anomaly within his time. So there's a lot of these kind of vignettes that are going to be displayed inside there. I think there's maybe 4 videos. And they're also borrowing some very interesting things from the City Museum collection as well. So just over the time as well. So this is Bryony Dunn. Bryony was in residency with us in 2022. I'm showing this because Bryony is also going to show ceramics for TULCA. So this is, again, riffing off of the Hellfire Club a little bit, where she had heard that some of the bricks that were made, and they were red bricks, would have been laid out in the sun to dry properly. They wouldn't have been fired. They would have been laid out in the sun to dry. And so anything that was passing through would imprint on them. So maybe a deer or a goat, you'd have these kind of imprints or burr prints. So she pulled clay from the river and made her own bricks. And we got a local goat that we sourced through the postman, actually managed to find that. And he printed onto that. And she also did these kind of Askeaton backwards on the bricks. So it kind of hides into that kind of like secret society in one way, but also making your own bricks. And she's going to be sited in the Zoology and Marine Biology Museum in the university. And her point of departure, she did a ceramic, what was it called? And just to read it, the European Ceramic Work Centre. She did a residency there in the Netherlands only just last year. And the work she made there is looking a lot at goose barnacles. And sort of like these kind of folklore surrounding goose barnacles and how traditionally they were perceived and how they were grown. So it fits in really well. It's going to sit within the cabinets, within the museum again, as part of what they have there. So they have the blashkas, they have the wonderfully stuffed animals, and they'll also have these beautiful ceramic works that Bryony's made. And she's also made these quite flat ceramic, tiles really, which were film stills that she had taken as well while on that residency. Where she's out to sea and sort of looking for goose barnacles in real life. One of the other amazing museums out in the university is the James Mitchell Museum for Geology, and artist Stuart Whipps is going to be sited out there. Again, I haven't had Stuart working me directly in Askeaton, though we have worked together as curator and artist before. Stuart, again, is no stranger to geology museums, and he has worked before in the University of Birmingham, responding to their collection a lot. So we have full team, a lot of the team here. We have Aoife from TULCA. There's the artist Stuart. This is John O'Shaughnessy, who is head of geology out there. And then this is David Fenn, producer with TULCA. Looking through the cases. This museum isn't always open, but it will be for TULCA. So go and have a look. Normally you would have to make an appointment to go and see this museum. So it's worth having a look inside. And it's a bit rickety and full of charm. So Stuart is going to respond to these labels, where he's going to create his own labels of, I won't say alternative history, but more to do with maybe kind of semi-autobiographical experiences of how he connects with geology or stories or different things that go with that. And he's also going to make a performance, which is going to be called The Leviathan of Parsonstown, where it's sharing its name given to the historic telescope that sits in the grounds of Burke Castle in Offaly. So he's looking at that kind of the rock of the moon, and then also the rocks of the earth. So this is just a few shots of him doing this before in the university in Birmingham. And this is on the TULCA website as well. I'm not sure if there's limited spaces, but it is worth maybe booking yourself in for Eventbrite to do this. That's going to be on the 2nd of November. So he's doing that within the quad building there as well. And then I was just in here this morning. David Beattie is going to site works directly into the Hall of the Red Earl, which is on Druid Lane, Galway. So apparently it used to be called Red Earl Lane, according to a historian I was speaking to this morning. So this is a really interesting spot. David Fenn, the producer, brought me here to have a look at this as well, because it's right within the city, but it's also this kind of, this paring back of the layers and this kind of valuing of what was here beforehand. So it's, again, it's a site with multiple histories. There's an old paved road from the 18th century that's in there. There's like the shape of kind of a crucifix shape. And then we also discovered as we were going on, oh yeah, this is another pillar here. It used to be a car park. Before that it was a social welfare building, I believe. It's now OPW offices. But it's just revealed with this glass frontage there. And that's Druid Theatre there on the other side that you see that back door there. And it's lit up at night. So it's this like in full view, but sort of hidden as well within the city, which is great. So David Beattie was very interested in this kind of extraction again, this stone coming out of the earth, and was responding to the site a lot because it's kind of a little subterranean, a little pushed down with the layers of Galway coming up around it. And these are some research images that he kept kind of sending me on WhatsApp going, this is interesting, and look at this, and smelting down. And he started to think about how you take these objects out of the earth and what happens to them afterwards. So he looked specifically at catalyst converters in cars, which are made up of a lot of precious metals. Titanium, I guess, is one of the bigger ones. And he thought about what would happen if you actually were to break that down again. So he has been working with not smelters, what's the word I'm looking for? Ironworks, maybe? Forges? No, that's not right. It'll come to me. I'm going to say smelters, but foundry, yes, there you go. Yes, that's it. I either haven't had enough coffee today or maybe I've had too much, it's hard to say. But he's working with foundries to extract these precious metals out of catalyst converters again. And he assures me he's doing it in a legal way. So, because I think there's a penchant at the moment for stealing these catalyst converters for cars to get out that precious metal. It's worth a lot of money. So he's taking these converters, breaking them down, and then he's going to make them into these quite small ball-type species, about the size of my fist, smaller I would say. And they will go back in on site again, in amongst the ruins of the Hall of the Red Earl. So while we were in there talking to the OPW to see about accessing the site and seeing if it's even possible, and using all the correct words, like it's a temporary sculpture, it's only art, yes, we have insurance, no, we're not going to be breaking ground, OPW can install it, it'll be very simple. All of the things that are important for them to hear to make things easier in terms of how you engage with monuments. The guy on site said, well, actually in the 1990s when they were renovating or excavating it, 98 I think it was, they discovered that it had been used as a foundry, an ironworks in fact, in one iteration of its history. So that was really interesting because it was spine tingling. We were going, this is amazing, this is a sign, this is it. It's all this conversation leading to this moment. So again, come next week from the 1st of November and you will see that in action. Another work of David's I really like is this piece called Shifting Forms. I'm just going to see if it works. There's no sound with this, so don't worry. And this is him again playing on that kind of technology in a sense, or how we're using it. And this is a space where there's also plants here, where it's like a robotic hoover, vacuum cleaver. Which everyone should have, I think. But anyway, that's going to be in the main space. But I wanted to show that in comparison to, this is a kind of a different way for David to work. This is a new commission. So he's got these kind of interesting responses to site and space, and then also presenting artwork that sits within the gallery. And this has been important for me as well to think about how artists are represented within TULCA itself, where sometimes you go to these exhibitions and you're seeing one work and you're thinking, this is amazing. What's the rest of the work like? And yeah, you Google it and you go onto the website and it all looks great, but there's nothing quite like being in a room with an artwork and experiencing it firsthand and being there. So it's nice that for David, he has 3 pieces of work within the show, and they're all dotted around different venues as well. This is Niamh Schmidtke. Niamh's is also a ceramic piece. It's quite large as well, and this is going to be in the print works. So again, it's responding to these kind of greenhouse emissions, but it's also riffing off or chiming with the Irish Sea, that space between Ireland and England, and the kind of construction emissions going on in a certain time span there as well. One of the other venues we're using is Freeney's Fishing Tackle Shop, and that's on High Street. I keep saying it's Shop Street, but it's not, it's High Street. This is an amazing store. I really like it because there's one very like it in Askeaton that's just a hardware store where you go in and you'll never find anything on your own because it's just a treasure trove, just stuff everywhere. Those stores don't exist so much anymore. So there's an artist going in here who is a craftsman, and he makes these beautiful walking sticks. But he'll also make fishing priests, which are they're almost like a big bludgeon, really. They're like a policeman's baton, I suppose, really is what you would call it, for want of a better explanation. I don't have any images here, but there will be a couple of those sited inside, and then there will also be a few of these on the window of Freeney's. But Seanie will also get his own space as well to show work within the main gallery, which would be in the print works. So he hasn't been formally taught. He would have learned how to do this just from working as a labourer on a farm, where he would be taking the cattle to market and just pick up a stick on the road as he was going, and just kind of hop, there you go. But as he looks through the timber, he responds really well, and he starts to shape them, and he works in a very intuitive way where he starts to push and pull a bit. He'll see something in the timber that you or I won't see, and then he'll just start pushing that a bit more. He also, I'm just going to draw your attention to the eyes here. Seanie used to work in Roadstone for a long time, and he always said that when he retired, he's in his 70s now, when he retired, he took a box of these cat's eyes with him. But judging by the amount of cat's eyes that appear in his work, I'd say it was a little more than a box. But they're very interesting spaces. So Seanie had his first exhibition in his early 60s, where he showed work, first of all, in Askeaton overhead the tourist office. And then from there, he had a solo exhibition in the Douglas Hyde, and he's shown internationally in a lot of different spaces over the years. And now he's in TULCA. And he makes these really fantastical creatures as well. I think he's kind of pushing himself a bit more for TULCA because it's a venue where it's an actual gallery, and he's responding to that. This is Star Wars Man. So he's comprised of a bit of bog oak. I think that's probably a ram's horn. And then he's got his own little walking stick here as well. Seanie himself is a bit of a fantastical creature, to be honest. This is him in the 70s performing as An Puck of Willa for, I can't remember, some kind of festival, I think, in Killarney, maybe storytelling festival. So that's him, and he's got, again, the kind of puck goat's horns that he's constructed himself, a bit of a hat, and he has these 2 sticks that he's using for legs, and a neighbour has him tethered there just in case he might attack the crowd or something. Leanne Herlihy is doing a really interesting performative bus tour called Beyond Survival School Bus. Again, this is a really limited event, so you want to start booking in for it. I think it's a 19-seater bus where they're going to take it out towards Moycullen Bogs and respond to the landscape in alternative ways. So Leanne has already been here on a site visit and has kind of identified spots. They've done this before in Dublin, so this is the first time kind of bringing it out into a more rural capacity and responding to the site in a way. That's a poster for it. They're there in action. And then here's a list. So it's kind of like an alternative educational bus tour that will happen in lessons throughout. So I would suggest get on to the website and see what you can see. Book a place. This is John Carson, artist John Carson. John is also in his 70s now. I'm very interested in having that kind of intergenerational as well as multidisciplinary approach. And he's going to be in the Galway Tourist Information Centre. So again, another sort of off-site, I suppose, really, but vitally connected, I would say, to Galway. And he's showing an older work. This is terribly blurry now, but that's the best I have for this morning or for today. So I'd walk from Cork to Larne to see the 40 Shades of Green. So this is a work from 1978, where to walk from Cork to Larne would have been walk through border control, walking through a very complicated landscape, particularly coming from the north to the south, or the other way around even. And he's looking for green. But the green he's finding is, as well as a couple of bushes and this and that, there's like army tanks, army boots, that kind of fencing. It's it's quite a tense landscape, I would say. So naturally, I thought it would work really well when you talk about something like 40 shades of green in the tourist office here in Galway, and offer that alternative way of looking at the countryside here. An interruption, if you like, in the Galway tours, hopefully. This is a practice. I've only a few left now. Thanks for bearing with me as well, everyone. I know it's a dark space and you're all after lunch, and the seats are very comfortable. This is artist Lily Van Oost, RIP. So there are two research platforms being presented within the exhibition also. One is with Peter Fend, who actually will be able to come and be part of the programme. And the other is Lily Van Oost, who passed away several years ago. But her archive is held, or a lot of her archive is held by Grace Wells. We're also borrowing from Nival, of course, as well, because it's important to have. So Lily was originally from, she's a Dutch artist who settled into the Black Valley in Killarney, and would make very interesting works, mainly textile based, but was kind of ahead of her time in how she spoke about the autonomy of the female body, and how she would speak about the kind of rights as well, I suppose, in terms of that, her sexuality. There was no space safe with Lily, but she would start making her own fabric, or she would start to weave, and then after a while, she became aware that there was a Pretty Polly, which is like a nylon tights factory, in I think 2 or 3 towns away from her. So she would go to them and they would give her the wastage, the leftover of the nylon. So she started then weaving those tights as well. And these are some of the summer schools she would host where they're weaving these kind of structures. And I really like this as well. So she used to do these kind of wild proposals and projects where she would make a Gansey for a Dublin city bus, which is like a jumper basically. And she would have that weaved and kind of knitted on. It was quite ahead of its time as well. But these images are wonderful, and Grace is showing some of the drawings that wouldn't be seen before as well. So kind of provocative in their own way. Like these would be from the 70s, you know. And this is going to be shown in Galway Arts Centre, because Lily would actually have shown her work in Galway Arts Centre back in maybe the 80s. I'd have to check that up again, but it's kind of nice that there's this circling back to a city that appreciated her, because not everyone appreciated her kind of aesthetics and her way of working. So part of the public programme, because I've touched on a couple of the events there that you'd need to book in on, which is important. Part of the public programme is a film programme in Palace Cinema. And I just very quickly flipped through this here. This is Super Garden. It's an Irish language video by artists Colin O'Connell and Michelle Doyle. And the central narrative is looking at the spirit of a Cailleach, which is a kind of a witch type figure, who gets up to all kinds of sinister things. It's quite an interesting programme. So it's a bunch of short films, really. This is Regina Jose Galindo in a 2013 video called Tierra. She's from Guatemala, and she's responding again to that body in the landscape where this earth-moving excavator starts to dig around her until she's just left in that platform on her own. But she's also responding to upheaval within the political landscape of Guatemala at the time. And this is Patrick Hawks, so this is Whale Fall. Patrick, I think Vikings season 6, constructed a whale and just left it in Loch Bora, which is a wonderful sculpture park. If you get to, you should go and have a look at that. It's situated in Old Bog there. It's like a just transitioning of our peatlands into a sculpture park. Anyway, the whale got abandoned, and Patrick saw this as a really interesting thing that had happened and started to construct a story and make a video work about that. So it's a scene of a beached whale, really, but, you know, in the Midlands. And he started to kind of, I suppose, upscale, retrofit. He put in eyes, he kind of made it a little more whale-like, and he kind of constructs this, you know, narrative around that with these 2 female actors who are responding to that whale, that anomaly in the landscape. There's also going to be a video by John Carson as well. John has a couple of iterations in the show. He is showing an older video called American Medley. I don't have a still of that, but this is a Joan Jonas video, again an older one called Volcano Saga, which is responding to the Laxdela saga from 13th century Iceland. And there's a very young Tilda Swinton in there. So it's quite an interesting, slightly trippy film that took about 4 years to make, where she's on site shooting it, but she's also constructing performances within her studio and kind of melding it all together into one really wonderful artwork. So I think I'm going to leave it there.